Hi, everyone. My name is Philip Dawson. I am a data and AI governance specialist. I am currently the co-chair of something called the Canadian Data Governance Standardization Collaborative here in Canada that is producing a roadmap of priority data governance standards that should be developed as a matter of priority. And I'm a technology and human rights fellow at the Harvard Carr Center. And today, the topic for our session is the secret to success, building consumer trust. And I've titled my presentation, Building Consumer Trust Through Data Governance. It might be a bit of a different approach in this presentation. We're going to zoom out and look at some of the higher level considerations to building consumer trust in the data economy, because I think that we see that one of the sources of the erosion of consumer trust is the disenfranchisement of the consumer who endures decisions about the use of his or her data without the ability to question these decisions, provide input, or hold decision makers to account, and while at the same time is able to observe that many of the benefits of these decisions accrue to a small group of people or companies. So many of you will be familiar with the current data governance regime, which is based on the notice and consent model, in which which jurisdictions globally are looking to modernize to make the procuring of meaningful consent more feasible, but challenges remain as new uses for data are conceived of and trialed on an ongoing basis, making it difficult for individuals to discern the risks associated with the collection and use of their personal data. We also know that privacy policies in terms of conditions are very long and complex, long to read, complex to understand, and most people simply don't pay attention to them. At the same time, these processes are unilateral and non-negotiable. The consumer is not able to alter the terms of these agreements or the use of their data on an ongoing basis. And since the Cambridge Analytica scandal, consumers have been increasingly conditioned to the effects of this approach to data governance on their well-being. And some of you might say, well, sure, this is true for social media platforms. But things are done differently in the healthcare sector. I think that's definitely true. But the point I want to make is that these worlds are increasingly converging. For instance, Project Nightingale, you may recall this from maybe 2 years ago at this point. Project Nightingale saw the secret transfer of the personal medical data of up to 50 million Americans from one of the largest healthcare providers in the U.S. to Google, without patient consent or without the consent of those patients' physicians even. There was a whistleblower, as you can see in the headline, who brought this to the public's attention. In another case, a breast cancer advocate who began a private support group on Facebook for women with a genetic predisposition to breast cancer discovered a loophole in the privacy settings for closed Facebook groups that would allow developers, marketers, and others to download the membership list of Facebook groups for thousands of diseases and conditions, exposing her community and others to vulnerability. And another case informs us of the precarity of data, and health data in particular, as a public asset. In this case, the bankruptcy of Genesis Research Institute, a nonprofit that in 2013 took control of an academic academic cancer research lab on the campus of St. Elizabeth's Medical Center in Brighton, Massachusetts, led to the deletion of all data produced by the lab in the context of the ensuing bankruptcy proceedings, and years of medical research and data were lost. And more recently, we can also look to the evolving use of contact tracing data worldwide as an example of broken consent promises and lack of accountability as different authorities who are grappling with the challenges of the pandemic and how to contain its spread have gone back on some of the promises of who they might be sharing this very sensitive data with. As a result, we should not be surprised that more and more groups in the health research community are also calling for new models of data governance to help ensure the responsible management of health data. This is from an article of a group of researchers in Canada who are highlighting the potential of data trusts, or at least investigating the potential of data trusts as a way to improve oversight, accountability, and stewardship of public value extraction from health data. A new approach that I argue is rooted in a democratic approach to data governance. So some of the weaknesses of the current model that we've gone over, I've just listed them here. I'll just repeat them. So there are limited checks and balances that leave us vulnerable to abuse when we're talking about decisions about the use of data, whether it's personal or non-personal data. There's a concentration of data access and the benefits of value extraction. There's limited potential for oversight and accountability, and we've seen that these models that have concentrated control in different corporations are also ill-suited to advancing the public interest. Data trusts have been in the news quite a lot in the last year and a half. It's been applied to a number of different fields, particularly in the context of the use of data through artificial intelligence. People have suggested that this could be a new way of incorporating diverse stakeholder inputs into the usages of data, and a mechanism of installing greater accountability. People have even suggested that this could be a way that contact tracing data could be better used and managed. So what is exactly a data trust? A data trust is a third-party stewardship model that is based on the common law trust, in which an asset, in this case data or data and code, or ultimately technology, is placed into a trust and managed by a board of trustees or a trustee organization according to a trust charter, which contains terms for the collection and use of data, as well as a purpose for the use of that data, or a goal for the use of that data. An interesting feature of trusts is that the trustee organization will have a fiduciary duty to manage the data for the benefit of the individuals or groups in question, as well as incident duties of prudence, diligence, loyalty that could incentivize the beneficial data sharing and use, as well as the protection of the data. The trustee model also incorporates liability of the trustee, which strengthens the accountability of the model and gives those affected an ability to seek collective redress. This is a model that has been discussed widely in Canada in the last year and a half, in large part due to a smart city initiative in the city of Toronto, where the data collected in public spaces was proposed to be housed in a trust with some level of public oversight in terms of a multi-stakeholder board overseeing the use of this data, and the ability of citizens whose data had been collected or participated in generating the data in the smart city context could provide input to this process. More recently, it's been actually suggested as a potential model for the Quebec government to increase access to the health data that is generated in different labs and university teaching hospitals in the province, as a way to link data sets with better stewardship, more robust oversight, and transparent accounting for the use of the data. So what are some of the features of data trust that make it a more democratic way of doing data governance? Well, it has the potential to increase access to data as a public interest resource, to increase representation decisions through multi-stakeholder trustee organization that could incorporate, in the healthcare context, researchers, physicians, hospital representatives, even patient groups, and so on. As well as enhanced collective accountability mechanisms, where decisions about the use of data could be contested by individuals, as well as access to a remedy. So there are some implementation requirements that left to be met, and at least in Canada and in other jurisdictions, modernized privacy legislation, and even in Europe, the new Data Governance Act. Some of these are beginning to be addressed. For instance, there would need to be legislative changes to enable consent for socially beneficial purposes or for certain applications of certain R&D applications, to enable the disclosure of data collected into a trust to increase the ability to share this data. And there would need to be technically the building of new digital infrastructure that could facilitate data sharing among some of these entities that would want to have access to data inside the trust. And of course, the development of harmonized data standards to remove some of the friction that can exist between different entities wanting to make use of different data, to share different data, including data licensing standards. And these are just some of the considerations that need to be explored moving forward. And I believe my time is up, and I'll be happy to answer questions in the Q&A period. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. So hello, everyone. I am Maria Palombini. I lead the IEEE Standards Association Healthcare Life Science Practice. And Phil gave a great introduction into important concept of data trust. I think when we talk about anything in the digital health or any aspect of our healthcare ecosystem, the question of trust continues to arise, especially when we're talking about new technologies, transaction of data, security of data, privacy of data. At the end of the day, we're always talking about trust. So today I definitely want to share with you a little bit about, first of all, who we are, IEEE. We actually pronounce it IEEE, not IEEE, but we are the Institute of Electronic and Electrical Engineers. I am in the standards branch. Many of you may be familiar with one of our more well-known standards, 802.11 Wi-Fi protocols, and actually an IEEE SA standard, which we all use on our wireless devices. But more importantly, the IEEE is a global organization. We've been around for more than 100 years. We are the world's largest technology association. We have 420,000 members globally, and our mission is advancing technology for humanity. So with that in mind, a little bit about the healthcare life science practice. We're really committed here in the practice. When I say we are a global community of stakeholders from multiple walks of life. Obviously, we have engineers, technologists. We invite regulators, clinicians, pharmaceutical professionals in any area of drug development and distribution, patient advocacies, researchers, all to come together and identify the challenges that we're having with driving adoption of the technologies, especially ones that we call quote unquote new or emerging in the area of AI, blockchain, your biosensors in, on, around the human body, mostly in the world of how can we advance medicine with the great opportunities, but doing it in such a way responsibly that we can have trust in the application and the data governance that comes with the use of these technologies. So, we are guided by these three core questions and objectives that I'm sharing with you. Really, at the end of the day, our goal is to elevate the quality standard of healthcare, make it accessible to everyone, and enable innovation and trust through open and standardized means. So these are ambitious goals because we want to be able to have some sort of equitable area of healthcare for all. But the opportunities technologies are giving us are exciting, but as well have to be addressed in a context that everybody can contribute to a solution and be widely accepted and adopted. So with that, today we're going to talk about just some quick key points, which is, there's a lot on this slide. We're not going to be able to cover everything in 10 minutes, but we are going to get to the question of, we hear mobile health, digital health versus telehealth. They're not all one and the same, but they are interrelated. And at the end of the day, there is some form of data generation when we talk about these tools. we talk about one personalized health data source and record of trust. I'm sure you hear a lot potentially with the use of blockchain, the ability to have the right to agency of your health data, and what does that really mean in the context of digital health. And there's also the supporting technologies, like I mentioned, and the need for standards. And I think at the end of the day, how to take an action. We're not going to get to all these things. We're going to briefly cover them because we want to make sure we have enough time for your questions at the end of this session, but we're just going to start some food for thought. So with that, I want to start with this concept of one record of truth. So here we are, and it starts with us. We're all patients. Every single one of us is a patient in some form, whether we're a healthy patient or an unfortunate patient who needs care. We are all patients. And the reality is that if we want one record of truth and trust, it's going to start with us. And I think that's very important. And what by us means that we take the wants, the will, the right to manage our data. Who's more vested and more motivated than anybody, than our own selves, to take control of our data, to exchange it for something better, for better health, for better access, to get into a clinical trial, whatever it might be, to improve our quality of life. So how is that going to work, right, when we think about this? When we talk about patient data, I think it's really important to think about this idea that patient data is a supply chain, right? And it starts at the informed consent process. There's so many things collecting data about us in the digital environment and your traditional hospital setting. But think about your wearables, whether they're commercial off-the-shelf applications or a clinical research or, for medical practice, diagnosis, monitoring. You start with an informed consent. You go to the hospital, you have an informed consent. So anything that's started to collect data about you, there's an informed consent process. And at the time you're consenting, yes, I want to use this tool. I want to be able to get access to health and delivery and diagnosis and that kind of thing. But your mind is thinking that the data is going to stop where you're getting the point of that care or the point of that service. And the reality is it doesn't. Your data keeps going down this very long and cyclonic chain being distributed to other people over and over and over again. And as a patient, you don't even know. And even if it's anonymized, it's not your name directly tied to your profile, but that's what's happening to your data. And none of this is covered in your informed consent process at the start of the generation of the data, and you'll never know who's touching it all along the way today as it is. So when we think about this, it's really important, back to the record of truth and one record of source, is that if we start to empower patients with the right to consent data collected about you, regardless of the source, the generation of the data, how can we start to establish more trust in the use of that data? And if I consent and say, no, I don't want anybody else to ever have this data, it should stop right there. But today, and unfortunately, in our environment, it's not really working that way. And so there's some core questions that we have to think about. So I'm talking about the patient data supply chain. Obviously, when we think supply chain, we want it to be straight, not like this big, cyclone-looking thing. But unfortunately, this is the reality of the situation because it is dysfunctional and it is a little bit out of control. So if we have to think about in a more perspective, the person in the middle is not me, by the way. But let's just say today's view of the patient is you have all this stuff collecting health data about you, and you notice it's not in any kind of sequential, streamlined, one record of source. It doesn't exist that way. Multiple silos, multiple areas of ownership of your data, just all over the place. So the question becomes is, as a patient, how can I harness the use of this data for a better outcome? Because I don't even know where it's all sitting. Right? This is a big challenge that we have. What we want to get to is, I call it the digital unicorn, is this happy place where all this data is collected and there's this bilateral communication where I can get the data back and I can give the data back in the sense of whatever is my idea of exchanging my data in exchange for, with my consent and my knowledge of knowing where it's going and where it's ending, is really, really important. And this is back to the trust factor. So think about your bank account, right, in simple terms. If you're doing virtual banking, and if you choose, you have one bank account. And every single transaction that happens to your money, you can account for, right? You can see the data. You can control who can get money. You're saying who I want to accept money from. It's all in this nice little contained area if you choose one bank, right? Even if you have multiple banks, you still have visibility into the inventory of your financial data. Can you do that with your health record today? Can you actually go to every single source that's collecting data about you and have visibility into your data? No. You can get now, thanks to the 21st Century Cures Act in the United States, you can actually have digital access to your health records so long as your hospital system or your healthcare system is being compliant and following the rules in order to have open APIs. But your wearables data, you might get a dashboard. You go to a lab, Quest Diagnostics, they'll give you a PDF of a report. But do you have your own health bank account where I can take this data and use it the way I want to? And the answer is currently no. The technologies are there. But there's a lot of challenges to get there. There's a lot of incentives for you not to have that. There's a lot of questions about regulatory and exchange of data and that kind of thing, and these are the things that we're going through. But think of the kind of level of trust you would have knowing that you had complete visibility into the inventory of your data. So another example, just really quick, in outside of healthcare delivery terms, we talk about, that we're doing quite a bit of work of the IEEE SA around this area of decentralized clinical trials, which is heavily reliant on remote devices or decentralized health technologies and toolkits to collect data from patients who are not going to a site during a trial, right? And there's a lot of great benefits for this opportunity because we can have a more inclusive, diverse patient recruitment process. We can have better data provenance, autonomous data collection, and all these great benefits. But there's a lot of real concerns when we look at the use of these technologies and the use of this data flow collection and generation process, right? There's questions of verifying patient identity. There's questions of, the security of the data at the source, collected from the point of transmission to the point back to the ecosystem, and exactly how much data is given back to the patient. We have all these questions about the sensors being in, on, around the body. How are they, functioning? And is there any kind of noise chatter impacting the potential of the device themselves? Like if you have 5 or 6 devices in or around your body, the assumption is like, oh, they're all working great. Not necessarily, because they're all using different communication protocols. So there's just a lot of questions that we're doing from a technology perspective, but more importantly, we want to be able to have trust in these applications in digital health so that we can, 1, validate the outcome, but 2, trust in the sense that we know the devices are working, that we can verify patient identity, that we know that patient data is protected and there is a governance structure behind it. And more importantly, we want the patient to trust the process. We want the doctors who prescribe these devices to say, we trust it, so that patients feel trusted by it. And if we don't have this quote-unquote buy-in, then all these great technologies are not going to be able to realize their full potential. And ultimately, as patients, we're not going to have better health outcomes if that's the promise of these devices. So this is sort of the work we do in clinical trials. One of the big areas is naturally data provenance, right? We all know this is a major challenge. Trials go on for years at a time. Data is shuffled around in multiple locations. We're talking about this idea in one of our projects in an incubator program is how do we use smart contracts for the informed consent process and tie the entire experience of the trial back to that one record of truth, which is the smart contract at the informed consent. And all the actions and opportunities throughout the trial are appended to that informed consent via blockchain layer. This is an idea. Opportunities in these incubator programs is to find where the opportunities where we need standards, where we need best practices, and where's it going to meet these critical questions of trust and validation throughout the process. So, I want to leave a couple minutes for, for our audience to ask some questions. But I just want to share with you these incubator programs. IEEE SA is a nonprofit. Naturally, we have an open collaboration platform. We have multiple different programs. I'm showing to you 3 interrelated programs that we're doing on telehealth, decentralized clinical trials, and what we call WAMI, which is wearables and medical IoT interoperability intelligence. Naturally, if you notice, all 3 of these have a common theme of wireless connected medical devices in, on, or around the human body in different applications. But it's an open collaborative platform, meaning that we welcome stakeholders with expertise who are willing to collaborate, to debate, to develop solutions, and build consensus on how to bring these things forward through adoption, whether it be in the form of a technical standard or a best practice guide or conformity assessment project and what have you. So we welcome, obviously, anybody who would like to participate. I talk quite a bit about this in our webinar series, our podcast series. So if you have any ideas on topics or like to be a guest on one of my opportunities on one of our virtual programs, please do write to me, and you can visit our website for more information. And that's all I have. So I know we have a couple minutes from our audience for questions. I would be happy to take them. But if, Phil, I didn't know if you had maybe a closing remark or two you wanted to share. I think we have about 1 or 2 minutes left.
I'm just noticing that there's a question that came in. Can you use data collected long ago where consent was not obtained? Maybe I could take a stab at answering this, and Maria, you could fill in the gaps that I'll leave behind. But so I mean, it's difficult to answer this question without some of the context. But if there was no consent obtained, then it probably, and if it was personal information, it probably shouldn't have been collected or used in the first place. And so, like a new use would probably be just as would not be compliant either. If it's anonymized data, then you could use that. But I think the reality is that data sets are being bought and sold. I think it's common practice. The answer, I think, to the question is I think this is common practice. I think it's not compliant. And one of the reasons that there's this divergence is we don't have a lot of visibility into the usages of data.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I agree with what Phil said. I think, and just so that we're almost out of time, I just want to, mental health data, the question is mental health data information included in consideration in what you shared. Any information that is collected about a patient, whether it's for wellness, mental wellness, physical wellness, or anything fitness, is, I believe, a part and a component of the person's health record and wellness record, and should have the same level of trust and privacy and security as I would with a record that's obtained from a hospital experience or anything of that nature. So yes, in answer to your question, we do consider it the same level. So I believe that we're out of time. I think we could have talked about this all day, Phil. It would have been great. But I want to thank the audience for joining us, and Phil as well. Thank you for a great presentation at the beginning of this, and sort of really tying the whole idea of trust together. And again, please reach out to either one of us with any questions. And if you're interested in learning more in what our respective entities are doing, we definitely would love to share more with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Maria.